Yes.
Nicole Brown,
Present.
Chuck Boltman, present. Alice Ford, present. Diana Gonzalez. Juanita House.
Present.
Edward Rizno.
Present.
Allison Kruger.
Here.
Ariel Ojibwe.
Here.
Desiree Simmons. Aaron Witherspoon.
Here.
And Steve Wilcox.
Present.
Have a quorum.
Awesome.
Alright. So next thing is approving the agenda. We're still using Vista 5. So go around the room. 5. Next question.
I don't have internet. I have password.
There's a guest one. I think that if you click on the guest and then go into a web browser, it will connect. You click on I understand and then it connects you. It did do that.
Thank you.
So going around the room. Approving the agenda. 5.
Maybe if Ed, do you watch the last meeting so you know how we're voting? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Just making sure.
Thanks.
Yep. Me?
Five.
Oh, so does that mean that we're in those two there?
Those are your guys' seats.
Here, I have a question. While I was watching the meeting last week, or the streaming of the meeting, it was difficult to see who was voting, how they were voting. And so I'm just suggesting time that perhaps we do a roll call and then people could do their 5 or 0 or anything. Okay, just for the record, it's easier. The second question is, are we being televised this evening?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
It might be that way. Oh my gosh. These are the original.
And then the old packet has other stuff.
You guys may want to.
But it also has that.
Yeah.
The old packet also has that too. So that was the second part we're doing. I can see them this. Yep. Oh, there's papers on the back. I didn't know.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, so I think so.
I think this is.
So here's the logic is that, yeah, so we can have communication and then at one point we will have a presentation. And so you guys can scoot into these seats, I figured, or turn on the other side of the table, however you are comfortable to do it. I'm trying it out because I figured this is, so we have more room because I know next week we have even more people. So just trying to figure out what works for everybody.
Because that's what let us know.
It was also on the invite. I updated the invite.
Oh, well. Outlook.
I'm pretty sure. I tried. It was. Okay. I think I tried.
So public comment? Public comment, please. Yeah.
Wait, did we get agenda approval then?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. Sorry.
You're good.
Is there anybody that would like to make public comment? Nope. Nope. Oh, yes. Sorry. There's one person online. Thank you. Shay, I'm gonna allow you to talk. You have, is it 2 minutes? 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Okay. Hi, I am Shay Cadron and I'm a resident of Ward 1. I live very close to Water Street and I walk my dog there several times a week. And that trail is actually a big part of why I chose to move to Ypsilanti a year ago. It's very important for me to live in a community that values wild and accessible public land. And I thought it was incredible that there is this green haven so close to downtown. Not long after I moved here, I learned about the development plans for Water Street and was heartbroken. I thought that I had misread the values of the city and what Water Street represented to its residents. But then when I started attending visioning sessions, my first impression was reaffirmed because my neighbors clearly value the sanctuary that Water Street has become. And many seem to have a close relationship with the river and the wildlife and the land there. So that disconnect is a little confusing to me, and I'm speaking today to ask the committee to consider, have we put the cart before the horse? We're asking how to develop Water Street, but not whether we should. And from what I've heard, the people of Ipsy want to preserve the access to nature and to the river that Water Street provides. At a time when public lands are in peril and environmental protections are being slashed, wild spaces like this are more valuable than ever. And this land is not empty. It is absorbing stormwater, it's supporting wildlife, it's offering really important access to nature in our city, and it's even currently housing some of our residents. Preserving and restoring this land will do more for the long-term health of our community than tax revenue ever could. I urge the committee to consider the needs of the Huron River and the ecosystem that is reestablishing itself at Water Street when determining the scope of this RFQ, and to prioritize preserving as much of this wild space as possible in the process. Thanks.
All right, is there anybody else that is here for public comment? I don't see anybody.
Moving on to committee introduction.
Or no, we're on AKT. Peerless presentation and questions.
AKT fearless presentation.
And so if you guys want to, yeah, scoot into the chairs, you're be more comfortable to be able to see. And I will share. Well, I mean, if you want to see the images.
Oh, yeah.
The light gonna be there?
I can, well, you can't really see it.
Yeah,
So this doesn't get put, right? This, so they're still installing a projector. We're using the city's projector that we have is, so this is, yes, this is what we get for the moment. If you want to, I mean, if you want to see it, if you don't want to see it on the screen, then I can turn the lights on and then we can. All right, great. Wherever you guys want to be. This is, yeah. Yep, whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm Scott, I'm with AKT Theaters. This is Jeremy McCallany, with AKT as well. We just threw some slides together today to kind of walk you through, 4 or 5 different site maps that we put together, sort of for dual purposes. We're currently preparing a phase 1 environmental site assessment, funded by Eagle. So these figures will find their way into phase 1, but they're also meant to be part of the RFQ, to give the prospective developers useful information pertaining to the study. I'll skip ahead a couple.
Sorry.
The first set of maps is just
one here.
I'll get better.
The map is about the existing conditions at the site. We all know the site's not developed right now, but it had previously been developed since at least the 1880s up until 2010. So there are certain infrastructure features that are still on site related to past use of the site. I guess we'll start with the park easement, along the river. That is a 100-foot wide easement that includes the portion of the border trail that goes through Water Street.
Big
Cities,
green thing in the
Yes.
bottom, yeah.
thank you. It's city's intent to retain ownership of the park easement, so it's not gonna be part of the development area. It's about 6 to 7 acres in size, so, I think Water Street, the current parcel for Water Street's about 37 acres. So the redevelopment area at Water Street is actually about 30 acres. The other things that you see on this map are both above ground and underground easements. On the projector, the easiest thing to see is the blue. That's a water main easement that crosses the site. It tends to follow old street rights of way that have since been vacated. In similar location, there's also sanitary sewer easement, which is green, different shaded green and park easement. Up in Parsons Street, the depth of the sewer easement is about 20 feet underground, so it's very quite deep, pretty well integrated into the site. Okay. Sure. Oh, thanks. So what I'm talking about, the water and sewer easements follow paths. The red lines that you see are above ground, power line easements. So they still have active power lines on them for DTE, some telecommunications lines for AT&T. So that's the current layout on the site.
One question as we go.
With that,
Yes,
Sewer, is the sewer existing?
yes.
I think we're.
in Parsons Street, it's about 20 feet underground.
It's a good point, right? So when you're developing a site this large, and it's brownfield site, you do tip eligible expenses from brownfield planning can relocate utilities. But relocating the water and sewer line 20 feet deep that spans that is going to be extremely expensive. So this is kind of important to understand, especially for developer, as you start to grid this out. The utility lines to the left up there, you know, heading towards the river to the west, those above ground. I mean, relocating something like that is not as expensive as it would be relocated the sewer and water line. Any other questions?
How wide was the parking thing?
100 feet wide?
Yeah.
So, might want to speak to, currently accessible.
Okay, the trail through the park easement is 10 feet wider, so give or take. So the park easement itself is larger than that. There is fencing along the trail for quite a ways to restrict access to the remainder of the park easement and the interior of the site. The fencing currently there to keep people from accessing parts of the site. But the park easement itself is actually quite wider than that. I don't know. I would assume, you know, as we get to a point of the site being redeveloped, there'd be an interest in opening to the neighborhood from the trail. So that.
And it's 100 feet from the river on the way.
That's, I think, yes, essentially it's from the water's edge, 100 feet.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm clarifying. When y'all say that the actual development will be 30 acres, is that because we don't have like full access to the remaining 8?
No, the park easement, the city was gonna retain ownership of it. So the 100-foot wide strip along the river, that land area is about 6 to 7 acres, give or take. So the rest of the site, aside from the park easement, is about 30 acres. The last feature that's on this map is up here along Michigan Avenue. It's the city's current historic district overlay. I know that the historic district may be being resurveyed. I'm not-
It has been, yep.
But, it may not be, it may not include Water Street down the road. It does. So. The other question.
The recommendation in the resurvey is that it not be part of it.
Of all the
Whether
different
or not.
treatments, which would you say is the one that poses the largest impediment? If any.
Well, assuming we don't do anything to modify the underground water and sewer, probably just the electrical reason. Because as you can see, they go up, say, so it's not just power lines on the property, but they're integrated to power lines across town.
Sure.
So,
You could build over those sewer lines, what you're saying, that would be a problem?
Well, I think what you probably end up, from a development standpoint, is just have that roadway network again, right, to kind of continue to keep that, utility easement as it is, keep the utilities there, and then that might just become a road. But you should mention the railroad.
yeah. There's one other, it's actually a right of way rather than easement. If you, and it's kind of faint on the projector, but you can see these full rail lines going through the site. Those rail lines formerly tied, Ford Motor Company to the Michigan Central Railroad main line, which is north of the site, near Depot Town. When the city acquired Water Street, the old rail line was taken out, and there was an agreement put in place. You know, if the owner of the old Ford plant ever needed to get rail access back to the main line, the city agreed to put this right of way in so that a rail spur could be constructed. I don't know that the old Ford plant is occupied by anyone at the present moment in time, but it's my understanding that this railroad right of way, if the owner of the old plant does not make a request by July of 2029, that right of way automatically terminates things with the.
So the older lines that are east of there, excuse me, west of there in the site.
Yeah.
Those are shown for what?
They're shown for what reason?
Yeah.
They're shown on this map because the layout of the rail lines kind of dictated how the site was used in the past.
Yeah.
So they're not really pertinent to existing conditions necessarily. But for example, the area south of the rail was used as kind of a land building / dump back in the 40s and 50s. So it kind of helps to mitigate that nowadays, even though the rail lines are put.
I'm just making sure there's no one has right lines
Correct.
the paths. There's nothing there.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear well when you were talking about access to, parks. So were you saying that there wasn't any, like, so how would that? Is there other, are there other spaces that the city already owns that we could think into a public park or more wild space that would be from Michigan down to,
So by access to this park easement, all I meant is this park easement is 100 feet wide, but really the public's only using the paved surface of the trail at the present moment in time. But I mean, you can still access the park easement from the parking lot up on Michigan Ave. I think there's a roadway through here as well to South Street and South Park Street.
but there's no permanent obstacle to access it. Like, whatever was dumped, like under that one on the river. Or there's no other, something that would prevent us from using it public.
Well, the reason it's restricted now is because of the contamination. Yeah, so we're not to the point with removing the PCB related bad contamination contamination.
Yeah, some
Allow
of that is
access,
down here.
right? So that's part of just ensuring restricting access to contaminants, that's why the fence is put up. So ultimately, as we progress forward with continued remediation, move toward that development side, you could see the fence being removed because there's no risk associated with contamination there and allowing full access to them. But there's still, it's not that simple. Of course, it's still, there's still contamination related issues within there as well that need to be addressed. But I mean, and the whole site's currently owned by the city, right? So, and then this is specifically carved out as its own easement.
And I think, I know this will come up as we talk about different parts anyhow, but kind of along this line of questioning, just as we talk about the different levels of contamination for the different uses of the site, would thinking about a usage for a park space be to the same, more or less as for residential housing, for example?
So, not to get too technical, but it depends.
That's technical?
So, a little bit of history, the trail that exists now on Water Street, the city did do an investigation and a cleanup along the trail. And generally speaking, that investigation and cleanup was limited to 10 feet on either side of the Cape Trail, where there was contamination. It wasn't throughout the entire park, even along the trail, but it was, the majority of it. So contamination was removed, clean material was put down to prevent contact with underlying material. The fence is along kind of that 10-foot width outside of the trail to prevent access to the interior of the site. The trail cleanup has a certificate of completion from Eagle, which is basically a document that says the city did what it said it was going to do to make the trail safe. The certificate of completion relies on actually site-specific recreational cleanup criteria, which are unique. We worked with Eagle's toxicology unit to agree on a certain set of assumptions about how frequently people would be using the trail to determine what their frequency and duration of exposure could be to arrive at cleanup criteria that are specific for site. We could do something similar to that for the remainder of the park easement. However, if, let's say, a bunch of condos or apartment buildings were built on the redevelopment area adjacent to the park easement, a regulatory agency may perceive the use of the trail and the park easement a little differently, because it'd be more akin to someone's backyard, where you could conceivably be out there every day for several hours. So I know that's more information than you asked for, but right now.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
And my dog was thinking.
So there are unique cleanup criteria in place right now, but in the future, we may have to rely on residential cleanup criteria to allow the park easement to, if there's residential development on.
Is there, sorry, okay, anyway, for a similar question, the parcels that are shown on the map, do they have any implication of, do they even exist anymore, or do they have any implication for future development?
They are shown because when the city acquired the site, it consisted of all those separate parcels.
Yeah.
They all had unique land use histories, so they had different recognized environmental conditions that were evaluated through subsurface investigation. So the contamination at the site, the distribution of contamination is a function of the history of use of the site. There's a lot of information. We tend to keep those parcels on there so that when a developer goes to review all of the dozens and dozens of previous environmental reports, they can easily see which part of the site those reports are.
Okay, but they don't have any.
If I may, I might disagree with that. I do believe that the parcels themselves, which are platted lots, they have a historic precedence. Speak to the scale of what was there in the past. And that speaks to my way of looking at this, that it's not just a big shopping mall, the area that's going to be redeveloped, that it had scale, it had a human scale, as laid out back in the 1840s. And that's what, and that is evidence of. I'm just
I was
saying,
just kind of wondering.
just
if
the
we-
idea that it
if
doesn't
they had
carry meaning, it does.
Yeah.
I think it
The history of it, I know that there were newspapers where they found native remains, but do we have that history? That preserved anything that might remain?
I'm aware of, I think the same newspaper articles that you're speaking to, as far as geographic location, it was somewhere to the rear of the lumberyard, which,
It was over, it was over in that section.
and that's.
That's about all we
really
have.
the extent of what it's known about.
So, sort of plant be divided so that, I don't think the higher archaeologists, or like that would entail, but so that we could honor, I know it was, that from what was in that article, what they did was sacrifice them, and if we could prevent further, abuse of people's family, and the historical use of that land and spiritual use of that land. It I would want to know what kind of studies to take. There's like that. And that.
That's beyond. what we do.
So we get in the book.
Yeah, I mean, doing this phase one here, right, is the intent of the phase one is to follow ASTM standards for the environmental examination, and then ultimately provide this information to the developer party, which have to do the same thing in essence. But getting into the archaeological side of that is kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing. So yeah, I would think that considering someone to look at that, I would be the best route there.
something, but it's also required. But if you did any federal funding trying to get this process, you're required. We don't have choice in that. Share that. That's all.
For the backyard situation and residential, was there a certain number of feet that makes it not somebody's backyard?
If there is, I don't know what that.
You repeat the question. Good here.
Yeah, if everybody could try and speak up, because we're trying to also record and there are a few people watching, so if everybody can use
They're
big
indoor-
voices, that would be really helpful.
I was wondering if there was any number of feet that was made something not someone's backyard anymore in terms of development or parkland and residential, and what we were talking about a few minutes ago. But we don't know that now at the moment. And I also have a question that is related to the slides, the presentations and maps that were sent. I don't know if that's appropriate right now, but it was about the East Marsh area and the grant for cleanup. And it's sort of, there was a yellow area that went over the trail, and I was just wondering if we got that grant for cleanup, if the cleanup would go over the trail area.
So, that's a good question. Thank you for asking that question, because it does allow me to clarify a little bit. What I was talking about earlier about how a cleanup was done along the trail, the part of the site down in here, that was cleaned up, and there is access restricted to the parts that were not cleaned up, so that Eastern Marsh area is fenced off. Anything that's not fenced off was part of the cleanup along the trail back in 2017.
And so it won't be touched or developed with any grant cleanup money.
Well, that's correct for a couple of reasons, and one is that the city, they're gonna be paying the park easement anyway, so yes, that would remain. Part. Yeah. Yes.
I'll hold nobody up. I just wanna know, like, I'm kind of basically like, the technical stuff I'm relying off your inside expertise off this, so I just kind of want to be informed on, in regards to the parcels, will we have any, or will we be able to like put requirements in for people to like acknowledge those as well? Cause I know we're supposed to have a sit down and speak on what our stake is and stuff inside there before we have anybody else, but I just want to know, like, speaking long-term for the community in general, what would be your best insight as to a developer thinking to do anything with the area, knowing like 20 foot, you know, like, it's like kind of, you can't do too much with that, it's too expensive, like kind of what you were saying. Like, what would y'all look for there if y'all want to develop them?
You jumped way ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, but yeah, ultimately, I think what we're trying to do with the phase one, again, because anyone that's purchasing a contaminated property has to go through a phase one that ultimately would lead to a baseline environmental site assessment to protect with existing liability. And this is in the slide we're going to get to. So the process for a developer to come in and do their environmental due diligence, we're teeing that up because, like Scott mentioned, there's banker boxes full of documents. So when a developer comes back with the RFQ, having all this environmental information for them is super helpful. But we have a bunch more steps to go through in this due diligence prep process to get to a point of saying, hey, we're pretty confident that this constituents of contaminants are here. High likelihood of, resolving these contaminants to minimize risk would be this. And then that kind of tees up the developer to say, okay, hey, I can kind of do this here, but I can't do this here. We kind of are going to get a little bit into this now, but we need to do more work to get to the point, and we'll kind of match with, I think, your schedule of releasing this, which I think is summer-ish timeframe. So because following the phase one, because Eagle was assisting in providing funding for this, there most likely we would do some additional investigation outside of the areas that we've done investigation cleanup for, that would help provide some new data, resolve some of the findings of phase one, again, to assist providing this information to developers that would otherwise have to do this. Because we're trying to streamline the process for when the developers come in and then minimize upfront costs as well, so they can kind of move through the development process a little faster. Because, I mean, like Scott mentioned, I mean, the phase one of this magnitude with this much history, I'm talking 3 months worth of time to go through that. So yeah, that's kind of the intent here. And then eventually we'll get to a point where all that data is going to be shared with the RFQ release, and then kind of help direct kind of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Can you give a brief description of the phase one?
Yes.
So a phase one environmental site assessment is essentially a review of record for property, interviews with knowledgeable parties and property owners, and a site visit. So you're investigating the history of use of the site, taking a look at what's going on the site right now, and talking to people who have knowledge about the site. The point of phase one is, like Jenny said earlier, to identify what are called recognized environmental conditions, or RECs. An REC generally is evidence of a release of hazardous substances or petroleum products. The likelihood that petroleum products or hazardous substances have been released at the site, or I think there's even a third option, which is a material threat of the release. So if you have identified recognized environmental conditions, phase two is the recommended next step, which is a subsurface investigation to evaluate the extent and materiality of the RECs, so soil borings, groundwater sampling, sometimes soil gas sampling. So we have evidence to believe that there may have been release here, the phase two is, as they're gonna move to. And then if there has, in the state of Michigan, a third step would be the baseline environmental assessment that Jeremy mentioned. Which is you disclose to the state of Michigan what you found in your phase two. So that the state knows that that contamination was there before you purchased the site, and you're therefore exempted from liability for having to clean up, as a response.
There's the another question. Is there any evidence of, buried storage tanks in any of these parts?
Yes, there have been storage tanks encountered on multiple parcels. There was, I believe, a storage tank identified on parcel one in connection with demolition of the former structure there. Parcel 16 had a bunch of tanks on it. I
Maybe we
think,
should move on.
yeah, we'll kind of get to that,
Yeah.
but, to answer your question, yes, there are, have been a lot of storage. Okay.
Next one, or?
Allison, do you have a question?
No, I'm not also,
Okay.
here, I guess, let me give out.
Yeah, you can probably jump ahead.
I think we've done that, yep.
So the question earlier about the significance of the forming parcels, it's difficult to see on the trajectory, but on the mostly the ground, that form map you have in front of you, this is a different version of that map. When the city went to acquire the Water Street redevelopment area, as those 39, 40 different parcels, the city did its own due diligence, phase into phase twos on most of the parcels, based on the historical use. Everything that's shaded brown or light brown is what is called a Part 201 facility or a site of environmental contamination. The city went to phase one, then they went to phase twos, they identified contamination, they filed baseline environmental assessment. Subsequent work on the site identified additional contamination that different parcels that also meet this definition of a Part 201 facility. Those are the tan shaded parcels. And then parcel 16 up along Michigan Ave is shaded a red color. That's a Part 213 property or a leaking underground storage tank site. So to your question a moment ago, multiple underground storage tanks were removed from parcel 16. A cleanup was conducted. It's called the B-test area. Back in 2004. The intent of that cleanup, however, was to remove highly concentrated petroleum contamination in the interest of simplifying soil management decisions for a prospective developer at the time. It wasn't done through Part 213. It was done under Part 201, which is environmental contamination, whereas 213 is underground storage tanks. So with respect to the phase one that we're doing now for Eagle, the investigation associated with the leaking underground storage tank issue on parcel 16 remains open. So one of the objectives for supplemental work following on from the phase one is to try to close that release, which can involve a few different things, but so, as you can see, about 98% of the land area of the site is either a Part 201 facility or a Part 213.
But that does not mean you can't redevelop that.
Correct. And what a facility or property means is the contamination is above residential. So,
Or 201 and 213.
yeah.
You say that 201, 213 are above residential.
Cleanup criteria. Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
You state that Part 201, 13. And is that like a regulation?
Yeah, so it's part of Michigan's Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Part 201 pertains to sites of environmental contamination. Typically contamination not caused by a release from a storage tank, whether it's above ground or underground. Part 211 pertains to underground storage tank system. So part 213 is underground storage tanks that have been caused contamination.
Can you speak to whether the residential criteria you're referring to, that this contamination is found, is that for single-family residential, duplexes, more intense use like apartment buildings, and they're all the same?
There's no distinction. So it's based on the assumption that you could be at home 24/7. You know,
I understand, but
regardless of what type of.
I know this is like random question, but so for remediating the giant area that was just remediated, like you all dug out the dirt and took it somewhere else.
Yes.
And in construction, you dig out the dirt and take it somewhere else. So I'm just wondering how, like, if the storage tank is there and somebody wants to develop there, is it like way far down? Or like, wouldn't part of their plan being digging out the dirt anyway? I don't know if that's really a question, but you know
Well,
what I'm
so
saying?
when Scott's referring to the exceedances of certain criteria, you can have low exceedances, or you can have extremely high exceedances. And additionally, these exceedances are relative to a certain exposure pathways. So for example, we find groundwater contamination, access to groundwater by a human would be a pathway to receiving contamination, right? And in some instances, there's direct contact. So if you touched the contamination, that's an exposure pathway. So the PCB area is highly contaminated, and it was a direct contact issue there. So that's why we were focusing efforts there, because you had hazardous levels of contaminants, which are bad, right? So in other areas of the site, they're not necessarily super bad, right? To the point where you might not need to remove dirt. You could do other engineering controls to reduce the exposure pathways, thus in turn reduce exposure to the.
And I think also maybe what you're asking also is that, like, won't some of that get dealt with within development of it? And the answer is yes, but a developer needs to know that, because they'll have to handle those soils in a certain way, or
Right, and again, sometimes you would, sometimes you don't necessarily.
just depending on what it
Yeah.
is. But letting them know that at the get-go is really important.
Yeah.
Right, it depends on the development type. For
Right.
example, we're talking residential, development standards aren't as restrictive as residential, right? And then the type of use and how much ground disturbance they're doing, so there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, and this may be a good place to talk about the exposure pathways specific to our street itself. There's a handful of different exposure pathways that the state looks at and has criteria for. Jeremy talked about the groundwater pathway. The city doesn't allow people to install portable wells within the city limits. So the drinking water pathway is not ever going to be complete. So you might have a parcel where the contamination only exceeds drinking water criteria. Not really an issue for protecting people, because they're not going to be drinking well. The two main exposure pathways that will come into play during redevelopment of Water Street are the direct contact pathway and vapor intrusion, which is volatile contaminants off-gassing from soil or groundwater and intruding into air, people breathing. So, and there's really pretty simple ways to use engineering controls to eliminate the risk of exposure. Whether you put clean material on top of contaminated, so you're not at risk of touching contaminated soil, or you put like a mitigation radar in a building that pulls the vapors to the central location if that's an option.
Groundwater contamination affects gardening and landscaping.
The groundwater at the site is typically, I want to say between 4 and 18 feet underground. So there's not, for gardening purposes, I don't think the groundwater would necessarily be in contact with what I think of plants that are in a garden with their root system.
One thing in like permaculture, so you would have to like complain or trees that might have these systems. These are helps. Improve the soil.
That's, I think that's kind of beyond our scope as well, like, I do know, I can speak only to the trees that were removed to do the remediation on the central portion of the site. We did test that tree material for sweet speeds and that was the contaminants that we were remediating, so there were no PCBs in it. I think we might,
Would it be more, would direct contact maybe through you the higher risk in that scenario?
Yes. Yeah, because you're ultimately gardening with that. So then, yes, people are asked to be exposed to in that process. And generally, if you're capping material, there is a certain amount of cap required for equal standards. Additionally, there's a barrier put underneath, so that once, if you do exceed the depth of that cap, it's kind of not forward from.
typically a clean cap for residential scenarios, people, I think so.
And direct is different. What I was imagining was like heavy metal uptake in the plant, that was the thing.
Yeah, I mean, kind of beyond what I.
Yeah, so, yeah.
But generally back to this map, it's just intended to demonstrate the whole site. It's essentially a partial facility, so a developer will have soil management obligation, and for the end use to care.
So to even go that slightly deeper, the soil management, the developers would have to not just excavate for foundations in a normal fashion, they'd have to be constant testing, even though you've remediated some. Do they not have to be paying attention that, because of course, you didn't remediate it 100%. But,
Correct.
and you don't know where they're going to be digging.
Right,
As they dig them up, dig stuff up, it could still be contaminated. Does that not slow them down?
so the site is likely going to be regraded as part of the. The whole site is contaminated. Multiple cleanups have been done at the site to get rid of the worst of the worst. And what I was alluding to earlier with respect to simplifying soil management decisions, early on, and I think the first proposed redevelopment of say the early 2000s, when a developer goes to do what they're going to do, it becomes cumbersome if we have to treat different areas differently. And we don't want to spread very high levels of contamination into areas that are less contaminated. So that's why some of those cleanup activities were conducted. Generally speaking, on a contaminated site, if the contamination across the site is relatively similar, there's really no restriction against moving dirt around within the facility footprint.
How deep can you move the soil in?
It depends on what you want to do with this.
So your activities that disturb the soil, any building that gets put in there could go to either virgin soil, that is to say, undisturbed, or which many of these contaminants go down. And the developer is going to need to know what its foundational solutions, what foundation solutions make sense, and therefore what soil he's displacing, and therefore whether he's testing soil, because he's displacing contaminated soil that you left on the ground, not the person. But you get the point.
Yeah.
So that level of complexity is the developers, and that's also, that I know that there's like funding for how to deal with these kinds of things, but I just wanted to get a certain sense of what the capital is then.
So we'll get to the fill material and the varying of structures on native soil in a second. In terms of moving soil around within the site, as long as a developer is not touching these orange areas where there are PCBs that are regulated federally and not by the state. So it's tricky, you don't want to move that stuff around. Elsewhere, generally speaking, the developer can move soil around on the site without exacerbating contamination because the site is contaminated already. The testing comes into play when they have excess soil that needs to go to a landfill. So there's different types of testing. There's testing for assessment. There's testing for landfill disposal. So the testing for landfill disposal determines can it go to a type 2 landfill as non-hazardous waste, or does it have to go to a Victor Tosca hazardous waste? The cleanup activity that was done last summer, a significant amount of that material did have to go to a Victor Tosca hazardous waste landfill because of the concentration of PCB.
Just to add to that too, a big component of this RFQ is to ensure that developers have experience with brownfield sites. So that, the one area, well, generally speaking, right, the site does not have infrastructure, doesn't have roads, doesn't have parking lots. So experienced developers dealing with, somewhat questionable structural material and also contaminated are able to reuse the soil on site for infrastructure improvements that would eventually have a cap as well. So the contaminant becomes a non-issue there as well. So that is a pretty important component of this RFQ is to ensure that they have experience in managing soil on site, minimizing costs. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I have two. Outside of that bright orange area, a lot of different developments will still take place across the contamination. They just have to be designed to accommodate and that information is brought forward in future development. So for instance, like if what I'm understanding, if we really thought that the absolute best use of a certain part of along Michigan Avenue, single family residential homes, and we found that because we didn't be able to do that, so the whole ground up 3 to 4 feet, so you have that built. So it's kind of a balance of the contamination makes sense there. The use can get there, but you just have to find a way to design that site so
And cost effective.
and cost effective. So are there any uses that are like off table? Like,
Well,
so it doesn't sound like we could definitely have any kind of like agriculture issue, so, you know what I mean? Something like that. But I was like, yeah,
But I feel like
But, yeah.
growing native plants, right? We want
Yeah.
to cater to these wild, we have people, system, your left leg, you have flooding.
yeah.
It preserves pollinators, bird migration, all of the rest. And native plants have deeper root systems. I'm assuming if kids are running around the park, they're gonna smell the flowers, they're gonna pick flowers, right? And maybe we won't have a food forest there. But that's still, that kind of contact is still, right? That's right question.
yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, those can be answered as you discuss for the development process too. Because I don't know where that would be, right, where the planting would be. So, and there's further investigation that can be done to verify. Sort of insane. But I mean, to Allison, your point, the removal of the PCB down the strip, the whole intent there was to open up more land for development and not have it fenced off because it was hazardous PCB. So, and ultimately moving down here is to open up more land for development and not have, PCBs are bad, especially bad if they're in a. So that's kind of the intent of what we did last year and then also moving forward with that this year as well.
Yeah, I want to clarify, permaculture is not just about agriculture, but to be, right, yeah, holistic wisdom.
Well, I didn't even go as far as that. I'm just like, are there any things like common use that would be not recommended for this site? And it's probably not meant to be baseball, right? But probably,
We have fields, contaminated sites and other
Yeah.
locations, so there's ways around it. there's ways to treat that, but yeah, I mean, for example, with contamination here in the river, right, we probably wouldn't be recommending infiltration of groundwater as a stormwater solution, if it could be exacerbated. So yeah, I think the development really drives a lot of this also, as to, you know, what their plans are and those exposure patterns.
Yes, so the orange spot, PCP, right? So this orange spot is designated down this lower corner. So what is the plan for the orange spot? And is it gonna be, worked around, these orange spots? As the PCP, and if this is disturbed, would then thus, have contaminants spill over into the groundwater spot?
So there is no long-term plan yet for these areas. The near-term plan is to conduct additional cleanup activities in the central part, or the central part here. Or on the left. The PCBs in this spot are, they're concentrated. They probably originated in the junkyard, and they were a strip of land cut and pushed down into this area, why there's concentrated PCBs there. Over here, the PCBs are much less concentrated. They were only detected in, I think, less than 5% of the samples that we collected in this area. But some of the detections of PCBs were high enough to be regulated by toxic. It's unlikely that we would recommend like a full-scale cleanup of this area, because you'd be removing tons and tons and tons of soil for a relatively small amount of contaminants. But EPA allows you to propose risk-based solutions. So it's conceivable that we may be able to leave PCB impact in place if we can get EPA on board with an acceptable path for the positive. Beyond that,
So then you work around it, right?
right.
Or
I mean,
cap-
our recommendation right now is.
Or you can cap it, so like the capping with like a parking lot or something like that.
Soil? Question mark?
Hmm?
Could you cap it with soil? If
Yes.
Not.
Yeah, possibly. At EPA, we had that discussion with EPA, and they are open to proposals that are alternatives to take.
Is there any concern of what's happening that's also right next to the water? Like, is there active leaching in the water? Is the Huron River water quality issue, or beyond the scope maybe, but just curious? I mean,
I am not aware of previous studies that have looked at that question. I can say that we have tested groundwater collected from what we call the junkyard cut disposal area. We have collected groundwater samples from that area and analyzed them for PCBs. PCBs have very, very low solubility of water. And we did not detect PCBs in the water in that area. We didn't test for other things. So I can't answer, but specifically, I don't know that any.
And that area is actually kind of a large area. It, a large, towards the north of that area has higher concentrations of PCBs, and as you progress further down, it's less concentrated.
With the, so like you having,
Yeah,
the hotspot. So
Yeah,
the
right.
PCBs are more or less in the center of that area. As you get toward the river, the PCB impact is pretty much.
so. Ed, go ahead.
For clarifications, so as I understand it, all the areas that are from that soil, there's not a restriction for mixing that. But if you get into the gray areas, you need to keep the soils within the boundaries of those areas.
The gray. So, yeah, I was.
Sorry, I moved
Going
the,
to get to that.
Oh, okay.
It's
Sorry.
actually kind of the opposite. The gray areas, are areas that have been cleaned up, so excavations that have been. Clean engineered fill has been put back. So what you wouldn't want the developer to do is to take. Soil from the ground areas and then move it to the gray areas. At least without putting plastic sheeting down underneath it. Because those gray areas are now backfilled with clean material. So I think. To, I guess, zoom out a bit. A developer should have a good, solid environmental construction management plan about what they can or what they should or shouldn't do with their concept. One slightly complicating issue that's not shown on the maps yet is there are low-level PCBs on certain parts of the site. They're not cost regulated, so it's a part 201 issue. And we're still kind of working through the data on that in order to make a recommendation. But you may not want the developer, like this parcel 26 was an auto parts manufacturing facility at one point in time. There are low-level PCBs that maybe they're related to transformers that were used on site, or maybe they were related to oil being used as a vessel pricing on an unpaid parking lot back in the day. They are well below 50 parts per million, but some spots may have PCBs above 4 parts per million, which is the state's direct contact cleanup criterion. So if there are detections of PCBs above 4 parts per million in that area, you may want to, the developer wouldn't want to spread that to other former parcels. To keep that.
Could you explain the acronym TSCA?
Yeah, it's Toxic Substances Control Act. That is the federal law that regulates PCBs, including the cleanup and disposal of PCB contamination.
Thanks. Can you tell us what the environmental condition is of the areas that are white?
So the areas that are white are either parcels that had land use histories that were not considered environmental concerns. There were a few parcels that were only ever residential. Or they are parcels at which investigations have been conducted, but contamination was not found. And then the rights of way, like the old South River Street, Parson Street, alley, may not necessarily have been investigated, but they have been streets for 100 years. So
You don't know that anything has bleached into it.
I think for developer purposes, they should assume. Because utility corridors underneath streets can't do preferential pathways. And we will get a little bit more into that.
next map. Pass this one.
Another thing that we want to let developers know is to say formerly had more than 100 buildings on it. Mostly north of the rail. All those structures have been demolished. Some of those structures had heating oil tanks underground. Some of those structures had petroleum tanks underground. Some structures had petroleum tanks above ground. There are old fire insurance maps that depict water cisterns under some of the streets. When a developer digs into a brownfield site like this, they are going to find foundations, footings, tanks, abandoned utilities, cisterns, additional pockets of contamination that were not previously identified. So a developer needs to have experience working on these kinds of sites so they know how to handle those kinds of things when they are.
It's gonna happen.
Yes, it is. Yeah. What's that? What about? Oh, yeah, thanks. For example, the old junkyard that we remediated last fall, we found, a very foundation of a former structure. We found a pipe that appeared to be a grouted old well. We found a pit full of engine.
Steve, that was when we found the cadmium.
Found a what?
I just knew that you'd be interested in that topic. I remember your face when I said that. That's what we found in the structure. Sorry. You're fine. You're fine. It's already gone. Took it out. Got rid of it.
When y'all say that it was over 100 buildings, at some point in time over the history of the sphere, and then those streets that are like already made roads kind of, have maybe something under it, not, it's kind of universally understood of our roads there. How will we be able to like express to the developers or the possibilities of doing to that? Like, do we rebuild them or like the existing structure? Was to allude to the city, I guess, would the parts will still be separated? Or are we trying to like get rid of this as a whole? Are we gonna come up with that idea? Or I know they're not being utilized, the parcel numbers right now, but would that have a significant role? Because if I was a potential investor and I want to do something industrial, I would look more so at the red concentrated areas, right? Where there's our previous structure good, and not like preservation or wildlife or something, right?
So I think, I mean, when a developer comes in here and does their due diligence, they do need to know and follow those parcel lines to understand what was previously there, to understand what they'd be getting into, right, as potentially something that might be found when they redevelop that. But in terms of, you know, like infrastructure and other areas, I mean, a lot of this is going to be driven by the type of development and the type of, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, right, like development is driven by market demand. So market demand will dictate what could go here. And what you find with a brownfield site is what are the limiting factors that are, or what are the costs associated with this that would increase the cost of building the building, right? And is that too high to essentially from a performance standpoint, if I can't get the rents, the costs are too high, then the project's not gonna work. Right, so I think a lot of this really, I mean, while you provide all this information at the end of the day and what they're gonna do there, I mean, the development really kind of drives what challenges or what items they have to address type of stuff. I mean, because at the end of the day, right, like along Michigan Avenue, you have former buildings there, you have some former contamination that was removed, but a commercial structure, you know, potentially residential up front following downtown, I mean, that would be a very viable thing there. From an environmental standpoint, you know, as Scott mentioned, the site's contaminated, you almost would do a presumptive remedy associated with putting a vapor mitigation system in the buildings. If you do that during design, it's not highly costly. That's probably the best solution to prevent any issues of accumulation of indoor air. But I, you know, as you progress further down, I think, or further into the site, the infrastructure needs are going to start driving a lot of the costs associated with this too. And Scott's going to also show another map just to add the complexity of the site. You know, foundations, and there's a lot of fill on site. So building huge buildings that require massive foundations with unstable fill is not cost, it won't be cost effective, right? So, you know, smaller buildings, smaller scale that don't require, you know, and again, I think generally speak, that's the fill map.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's also going to drive up costs. with it too. I don't know if I.
Y'all kind of wanted to go to the next slide to integrate that, cause I kind of felt that.
What's that?
That was going to the next slide to kind of integrate that.
The fill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one question about this one before we go.
Yep.
Also, so it's labeled former and existing buildings. So that means that like there's an existing part of the foundation, or what does that mean actually? How about that?
Yes, we're going to recreate this map. This map is from an older report.
Got it.
So this map is prepared when the city was acquiring the site.
Got it.
So the current buildings were the buildings that were there when the city acquired it. that
Got
have
it.
Since been.
Got it. Okay.
I think it's an 04.
Great. Thank you.
So the,
I was like,
the existing
no, there.
buildings were there when they acquired it,
yes.
the existing buildings were there when they acquired it.
Yes.
I got a question, why is 29H, outlined? Parcel number,
That's the parcel numbers that are within the drawing.
huh?
All of those objects are parcel numbers. That's what.
Oh,
that's
29.
telling you the symbol.
Yeah, that's just
Is the symbol.
symbol, for- like that's person 22.
Right, but you got it right here.
That's what
That's
tells you
got
it's
it,
a symbol.
saying.
That's what it means.
Yeah.
It's the parcel number for those funds.
And,
Okay, as the person that's supposed to be leading this meeting, we have 45 minutes left, and I'm not sure how much you have left in the presentation.
We have one more slide.
One more slide.
One more slide. After this, we still need to ask more questions, and then we have it on the
Agenda.
agenda to discuss the first 7 pages of the draft RFQ still. So if we can
What do we wrap up?
hold the questions until they finish the slide, then we can like do one more round, then get into the RFQ. Yes? Want to vote on it? Fine. Okay.
And also as we move through this process, if there are additional contamination questions, I'm in weekly contact with these guys. So, I mean, we call and text throughout the week. So like if there's other things that we need to get addressed, we can always do that later on also.
Okay. And just, this is also an historical map that was found during the phase 1 investigation. It is important just to show and you jump in there, the fill
Sure.
associated with the sites.
Yeah, this, it's essentially a composite map based off of both environmental,
I can't
soil
see
boards
that.
and.
Should be, we have it. I think
Yeah,
they're-
you don't need to see it. It's
Okay.
just, there's a lot of fill there.
Yeah.
Right? That causes
I
challenges.
can also email this presentation out to you guys.
So,
Yeah.
Yep.
so this information is based off of, I think, over 200 soil borings, both environmental and geotechnical. And it depicts the thickness of fill material at the site. Fill is, generally speaking, loosely consolidated materials that people put there. And is often mixed with other materials like glass, brick, concrete, wood, contamination. So what this map shows is there is a lot of fill material on the site. There's a legend that's not easy to see on the screen. The first color, which is 0 to 2 feet of fill, is not even on this map. So generally speaking, there's 2 feet or more of fill material across the site. The lighter the color, the shallower the fill, the darker the color, the deeper the fill. So we talked about the southeastern part of the site being a construction demolition debris landfill back in the 40s and 50s. That's also where the fill material is the thickest. It would be for foundation purposes, the more expensive place to put structures because you have to drive piles down 30 feet into the ground to support the structure that you want to build above. So it's very important for a developer to have an experienced geotechnical and engineering firm on board to find cost-effective solutions to building foundations based on the variable thicknesses that fill on the site. You want want to add to that?
I just say from an incentives perspective, this is, you know, reimbursement through tax increment financing for fill-related items, and a site like this is common and eligible. So these are typical of brownfield, old sites that we see fill all over the place. I mean, essentially, you know, debris back in the day was brought onto sites from all over the place, and I mean, for example, in Detroit, all houses demoed generally just were dumped right into the site, the basement hole. So it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon from brownfield sites, brownfield developers to adjust it.
That's it.
Do that.
Done.
Thank you. So my question is, looking at this, it's a large brownfield, and we all heard things like lead, PPE, stuff like that, and it makes us all feel a way about the site, and it feels dangerous and undevelopable, and alluded to it a little bit at the end there. Can you maybe explain how common is this site in the scale of brownfields, and where does it fall in the complexity of other brownfields that get developed?
So the brownfield program, right, kind of in Michigan began in, you know, mid-90s, right? And it's evolved over time, and I think developers' expertise have evolved over time. So, you know, the ability to handle more infill, urban, more challenging sites has evolved also, and meaning that a lot of the sites, you know, the easy sites have been developed, right, in many instances. So, you know, there's no question this is a challenging site to be redeveloped. But you know, if you scale this out, I think what we're seeing more and more, and the folks I work with in the field, is a lot of communities are doing more and more public partnerships to assist in moving challenging sites forward. And challenging sites don't necessarily need to be contaminated, but they, you know, old malls, right? Old malls are big brownfield sites, and they're very, very challenging to redevelop. Not just because they're contaminated, right? There's market conditions, there's scale, there's size of buildings, asbestos, whatever it may be. So generally speaking, this shouldn't be that difficult to I mean, what you really need to do here is get momentum and get one or two buildings started on a site. That is a key to show other folks great interest in the site, to start building momentum from it. If one developer was to take on this entire site, and you experience this before, it's not going to happen. Like there's no way from a funding perspective driving demand that would work. So smaller individual buildings along Michigan Avenue is very doable, be done very cost effective. The challenge, though, what we're seeing in the market is not necessarily the conditions on the sites, it's the cost of doing anything, right? From a building perspective. So that is a challenge. That's a challenge across all developers, whether it be a greenfield site or a brownfield site. But, you know, you have incentives that can assist here. You have a public-private partnership with the city. There are funds, there's pre-development funds available for this. So getting the right brownfield developer, this should be, again, smaller scale. Let's have successes first. You know, a $2, $3, $4 million project building to begin should be very, very doable.
One follow-up question then for you. You described malls as a brownfield site as well.
Yep.
So brownfield is a blanket term. Can you?
Yeah, so EPA defines brownfield as more of a contaminated site. Michigan defines brownfields as a variety of items. It's more of an economic development definition for brownfields. And what we've seen over time is that programs evolve. So brownfields in Michigan, in order to allow tax increment financing to reimburse eligible activities, in the past were just generally functionally obsolete, blighted, and contaminated. Over time, those definitions have increased to include historic, transitory development, And most recently, housing property is an eligible property to be where tax increment financing can be used to reimburse eligible activity. So yeah, it's really an economic development term. It's profit.
You said there are pre-development funds, and I don't know anything about this, but ground penetrating radar exists and probably helps show foundations and tanks and random things that people would encounter.
Yep.
Is that like way crazy cost prohibitive or?
Well,
something?
so that would be more on the developer side.
Okay.
Yeah, given all this information, they would make the call during the due diligence of pre-development side to do a GPR to check for tanks, yeah. At this point, from the city's perspective, I don't think it's necessary. It wouldn't be cost effective to do so. It's really a developer side that they would, but yes, that's an option.
One quick request, can we get that drawn?
Yeah, it's in the presentation.
Yep, and I'll email it
Yeah.
out tomorrow.
Yep,
We didn't.
we didn't print that one out.
Since we're gonna-
Yeah, it's in the PowerPoint. And we can send them individually as large files also. You just sent it a presentation.
Yeah, just.
Yeah, we can send them individually too, with their large 7x7, 11x7.
I don't wanna hold y'all time, what I was hearing last week, y'all saying that as a group, we can kind of think short-term remedy to getting some project, a 2, 3, 4 million project up along the Michigan Ave line, as like something to think about as a committee or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I've worked with many communities, Monroe, City of Southfield, where they've tackled a 125-acre site and they struggled with finding one developer to take on the whole site. And what they did was an approach where they walk through a process with qualified developers, and then they parcel off a portion of it. And then more can be parceled off after success is found with that first development. And the other component of that is that first development will start generating tax increment revenue to repay some of those funds as well. If there aren't any development on the site, you won't get tax increment revenue. And you don't want to sit, the city doesn't really want to put themselves in a position where they're locked in the developer for massive amounts of lands and nothing's done. Right? So I think an approach where you're parceling these off, see success from a development agreement, certain milestones met, then we can discuss other opportunities as we move forward, because the goal really is you need success in that kind of first development kind of starts building excitement and success from it. So yes, there's ways to do that from a development agreement, reimbursement agreement, include milestones. So the city isn't on the hook for waiting around for 3 or 4 years if nothing happens. Right? And I've seen that, right? I mean, and over time with brownfields, they're challenging projects and they need assistance to get done. The market generally won't cover them, so they need assistance to happen. And we've seen brownfield programs change to where we're not, the community isn't going to wait 5 years, nothing happens. So development agreements, milestones, all that's changed to ensure that the city isn't locked in with a developer and see no return over.
Throughout the RFQ, it used the word acquired. In terms of developers acquiring the property to develop. So in your experience, are there successful developments in which in this case, the city would retain ownership of the property and the developer would be able to develop and do all these things on
I have not worked on a project like that, but that's not the city's that can't. Yeah, most of the projects I've worked on are direct sales, direct build by developers, not a leasing structure situation.
Was he was asked basically like, can we do like a land contract purchase or someone do like a land contract lease sort of say? With the same spot, like they'll totally own it until they get done doing what they hope for it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the complications with that is, private ownership and tax increment revenue, property taxes. Right. And it really kind of depends, what, from a developer's perspective, if they're going to get an incentive you know, the incentive with brownfield tax increment is not a cash upfront incentive, but it's build, pay your property taxes, you sell those taxes. So depending upon, you know, what challenges associated with what they have to do, the developer has to do some brownfield eligible expense, then that might be challenging with that scenario, because they wouldn't necessarily receive the benefit back if they're, you know, not the taxable entity, essentially doing the work, thus in turn getting a return back.
Kind of like, you know, maybe not get our
There's
turn.
no property tax credit.
Yeah.
From the tip perspective,
Football.
Can I make a comment from the public on what he just said?
Unfortunately, no.
No, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah. Oh. Thank you.
Okay, so next we have the RFQ discussion, and we're going to cover the production through page 7, which is the environmental plan.
Whoa.
Now we blind.
No.
I was like, people are falling
in
asleep
here.
from that was it turned
There's
up.
nowhere to fall asleep in how cold it is. You can't fall asleep as cold as it is in
Can
here.
we turn it up?
There's nowhere to fall asleep in this cold.
Wondering, I'm not trying to put a wrench in. But just to name that, one of the things when we said we wanted to do an extra meeting was partially to kind of get a sense of what each person, what we wanted to bring, what is most important to us as we think about this process. And I think we had talked about doing it going through here and that it's gonna come out, but now I'm kind of concerned about it with our timing, what we have left. So I'm just wondering if we should do a different process to do that before the next one, because I know I can't do another meeting to do that. Is that making sense? Because I thought that was one of the main reasons we wanted to get together today, is to get a sense of that before we do the meeting with council. So I'm just wondering if there might be just, if we could just more talk about the things that are, I started noting some things, as people were asking questions, like, I was like, oh yeah, Chuck is like, yo, like the history of it, that's not one of my big considerations, right? So I'm just wondering if we do that, to do that within our time.
Do what? I'm not understanding. I'm not following.
I'm just saying, like, one of the things was that we wanted to say, like, for each of us, what is our most important things we're looking at as we're trying to go through this process?
So we're not gonna go through 1 through 7?
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that I don't know that we're gonna get to the discussion that we were hoping to do if we do it that way in the next 25 minutes.
So is that like a proposed vote for us? Should we put a pause on the 1 through 7 and work on the introduction? Or like, just for clarification, were we supposed to say that when we like sit into the agenda? 'Cause I like to sit into the agenda thinking like we were gonna do.
No, because we don't have to follow our, right?
Well, follow any rules.
We could have like freedom, no, you're totally like, yeah, we could have freedom to do that.
So like a quick five to everybody, we only got 30 minutes. Are we gonna be effective with our 1 to 7? Or should we really find out as a team where we stand at before we go to another presenter or something like that? We don't know what, stand at where people don't feel like attacked just by speaking a like untold opinion about the general situation.
So maybe a way to pose it to the group is we put the RFQ discussion after additional discussion and question.
Tonight?
Tonight.
What time is it?
At 9.
The RFQ
It's
discussion.
supposed to be done by 9 or
Yeah.
thereabouts. The mind familiar, sort of.
We have to do a chairman for next time still.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, moving the RFQ to next meeting is.
Anybody opposed? Like, that's the way, right? Anybody opposed to that?
All right,
I
so
think-
6 to 5, we'll start here.
Proposal is to
Yeah.
go
It's just not.
1 through 7.
To the next meeting. And we're going to discuss what brought us here, or what we're gonna learn about.
I'm a 3. I'd like to ask staff if what they think.
What's that?
I think that it's,
That's
well, so then it won't, it wouldn't, so it won't go on the next meeting as in next week, because next week's meeting's already agended. And so that meeting is already a thing, and it's a thing on its own, separate from what we're doing here. And so the next meeting would be the next meeting
Two of those.
would be June.
So we wouldn't get to our.
Unless you guys want to add another meeting, and then I'll notice another meeting.
We can, I'm sorry, we can go through this, I'm just saying, I'm just naming what the intent was for
Yeah.
adding an extra meeting.
No, and in full disclosure, I remember us talking about that, and I missed that on the agenda, and so that's a just secretarial issue.
So how much does that overlap with vision?
Right.
I do think that we'll do quite a bit of that, like where people share what their visions and hopes are for the future and that sort of thing through the visioning exercise that we're doing with OD. I do think that will happen. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. A part of her role was to support in that and getting everybody to be able to share and then put that together and present us with something that we have to use throughout the rest of the process.
So that vision meeting was when?
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, we're gonna, as part of the vision, express our desires for the site. Postpone that, so that's go back to the original agenda within the next 5 years. So,
Yeah. Because we're spending a lot of time talking about this, that we could be doing one of the things.
Yeah, to name it.
Naming that,
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Great.
Yeah.
so, let's,
sorry.
No, I'm with you. That's what we talked about. That's what this was for. Yeah.
So,
You're not wrong.
Nope. You're not wrong. Okay.
We're okay with that. Carrying on with the dinner. Did anyone read pages 1 through 7? And have opinions, things that they wanted to share? I'll just open it up.
Looking at page 2, and just clarification, so there's a thing, Water Street is advantageously, or no, there's page 3. Page 3, sorry, my bad.
All right.
It's a reference to pre-war. And I don't like the reference to pre-war, place, because that's how we go.
Why are you using the pages that's saying page 5 or something, or the regular number?
In the book, it's page 5 of 35.
Okay.
Page 5 of 35.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And so the second paragraph, there's the first sentence, it references pre-war community fabric and serving residents, and then, why are we referencing war? Why aren't we referencing specific time period?
pre-war community fabric, I had to get where it was.
Okay.
Civil War, World War I.
Okay. All right. Got it.
So the question, so like,
Mayor Pro Tem, are we on the same page?
Yes, it's in that second paragraph.
This one?
Yep.
Okay.
So while maintaining that the pre-war community fabric.
I think the idea there, that the fabric of that area was very different prior to World War II. And that the industrialization of this area, through the Willow Runs, hiding back.
And me being the age I am, I've seen that so many times, that it referenced World War II. That,
Right.
That's why, well, but it doesn't necessarily say that.
If it is pre-war architecture.
It doesn't look. I agree that it's sort of an architectural thing.
No, nobody's listening anyway, so. Again, he said it, so now people listen, so. Architecture had to be with hardwood flooring and, it's less, less centered around the automobile, that kind of thing, and there's more design elements, so, and it's less, let's stoic, design of the 70s and you can see where you end up with really pretty brutal kind of architecture.
So are we saying we need to edit this part and it needs to be more specific about World War II? Or that we are prioritizing building and design of the pre-war stuff? Which is pretty World War II.
I think just being specific would be good.
You have the word architecture, because I would like to preserve architectural integrity with Grave Street, again, to make it less strip mall and ugly, basically, and doesn't need the boxes and have personality because of
Yeah, so where am I adding the word architecture?
well, maybe the where pre-war architecture or pre-war architecture and community, I don't know what was meant there with the word community development, other than the fact that I've seen this in developments in Portland, again, where there's not a lot of permaculture, when you do need development, instead of subdevelopment all looking the same, they design into it
Sure.
some kind of architectural diversity, like it was developed over the course of like 70 years instead of 1 or 5 years, so they, that kind of thing. So that was, like, I love that about it, you can walk down the street and, it's all different. Maintaining authentic pre-war architecture and diverse community authentic pre-war architecture and diverse architecture also community architecture. I don't know how to
Are we trying to find a different way to emphasize the wording to make sure that our past, back,
so that somebody doesn't go in and develop ugly row houses or yeah, and like garages or
that's something else.
I mean, it could be, I think it's authentic pre-war architecture, comma, community fabric, and serving its residents.
Authentic pre-war architecture, community fabric, and serving.
Historical, is that what they're talking about?
Yes.
The history.
Historical, that's easy.
diverse
So pre-war diverse architecture.
right? Inspired, something that's consensual and diverse, a whole line of houses that look exactly.
I think that's more in the 4.0 section.
Oh, okay.
This is more like the explaining the area.
I'm like,
Hmm.
I'm fine with it.
I had a couple of things. One is around, just at the beginning, it talks about this phased approach, which we heard a little bit about some more, so I kind of understand it a little bit more. I'm trying to understand, okay, what does that mean? But I guess just for clarity, whether it would be that there would be a developer and that would be then saying, hey, we want you to develop the site and then you can do these pieces in this phase where you're kind of saying, I'm gonna do this area, and this area. Or if it's trying to say, we want this part to be developed, so we're gonna look for a developer for here. And then once that's done, we're gonna look for a developer for here. And then once that's done, we're gonna look for a developer here. Which of those is what we mean by phased approach?
I interpreted that as being the developer forces the city what they want to develop. And so it should be 1, 2, 3, or. I would say that it's whatever they want to propose to us, and then the city can turn it down.
So that's still going in conjunction with our phase that we doing with the land before anybody buys and stuff like that. Stuff that AKT and stuff is doing right now, but we keep continuing to develop on, or say whoever wants to. Right. I'm talking about that phase.
And I think like at least when it was under what I was working on was the idea of what Ed was just saying is that like we're putting it out there as the city is open to this, a phased approach or
Well, that, I like that's a preference.
It says a phase
It's
preferred.
maybe most appropriate. So like it might be. And so like I want in my mind I would want a developer to know that's something that we are also thinking about if we are.
Phasing timeline, but also full development, like if someone really wants to.
Yeah,
do it, like,
both, yes.
2 lots, and so I don't know if both like the scale and timeline are maybe adequately described in your question, but maybe that's just one else that maybe consider.
Yeah, because I think that because part of it is the way that the site was broken up before was in part to try to be like, oh, we were gonna sell the different parcels to different developers, right? And that's the thing that we're like, oh, that didn't work, so that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to say we want one developer that will think about the whole site across time
But I
and
think
purpose.
I think we're saying now that it could be multiple developers too. I think from what the discussion has been, that it could be multiple, and then that also helps with the demand or folks to see that it can be done. That might end up being many more coming and saying, now we're fighting over it, like whatever.
And so for this RFQ, then, I'm just trying to understand, because see, that what that means, with like, when, what you just described makes it seem like this process isn't like only for one, it's not like a one and done, it's like, it'll be like, hey, we'll put it out, and then the developer will be like, hey, I really want to develop
Right.
this section.
I want 22 and I want
And so the
18.
RFP would, RFQ that we're working on now would just be for this section, or is it like, and then the.
A master plan.
Yeah, so that's what I'm wondering, like, if we're asking for a developer to come in with a master plan for how they would use this whole site across whatever, or if we're saying, if they're like, hey, this is great, we wanna just get you started, we're gonna develop this part, and then y'all are gonna have to figure out this other part later. So I think.
If a master developer came and I think it presented to this committee and this committee felt confident enough to engage with a master developer, I'd be like,
Yeah.
Steve's been.
The point of the RFQ versus the RFP, where Ed said they come in and give us a plan for what they look like. Point of this exercise for us to develop that.
Yeah.
And so we have the control of, this is what we want to see, but what part of that thing, not, here's a chunk of land, tell us what you want to do with it.
Yeah,
So.
so then what you're, I just wanna make sure, so then that we might say, looking at this, hey, we're looking for a developer who might, in this area, do some dense housing. We're looking for a developer in this area that might do some park. We look for, whatever it is but that we would say, these are the things we kind of want around these spaces. And then we would put that out in the RFQ, and then developers would be like, hey, I'm interested in this, right?
I like
Yeah,
following those like suggestions you made with. You're asking of them to receive
Yeah.
So we have
So I
like,
think-
I'm sorry. I know.
No, I just.
Sorry,
No, it's helpful, because it just makes me feel like when we think about phased approach, that we could like be more specific about what that means, or like how we might want to put that forward.
Like maybe one of the community benefits or somewhere, I'm sure it fits somewhere in here, but it could be that the developer is required to do their development in a way that would facilitate future development.
There's one complication to having a bunch of different developers doing different sections, and that is the weed, which has been used 3 or 4 times. but I don't know exactly who you're referring to. But in any case, the we you're referring to in all cases are not city planners. So what you're talking about is, seems to be that you would need to have a city planner who would then start to prioritize the site, give the site meaning. The developer is gonna give the site infrastructure, buildings. The city planner is going to define what Water Street is, and then begin to shape the priorities by which you make interventions. That is to say, what do you build first? You don't ever see a city where the first thing they build is a park. Doesn't happen that way.
So is it
But
conflict
it did.
between the city planners in this scenario?
Can't hear you.
No, well, no, we're not, I'm not a city planner, so no.
No.
But I,
They started with we, whatever group you're putting inside the package of we, the city plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard though, because it's like you have to balance how much we can ask out of the developer versus this developer's out here having money on the side, right? So I struggle with this too. It's like if you parcel it off and you take everyone's, I mean, that end up with like a disjunct series of developments, but at the same time, if we provide a master plan that's overly set with use and with breakdown, I think we're in this economy, I think we're gonna have a really hard time, like finding a developer to build a master plan.
No,
Like this
it's not.
site's like
Yeah.
so complicated.
yeah, it is.
Many people also,
I don't know where that balance is.
Well, I'm sorry, she wanna say something.
You know, well, I could just,
Yeah.
sorry. Just that I disagree in terms of that the city planner has to define it. I think that's what as a community, that's what we're here to do and why this community exists. And I understand that we have to make money for it to exist, but other communities across the country have designed, and I know it wasn't in this economy, but at any given point, I know it's hard to think of Portland as being, in the press, but it was back in the 90s and aughts. And this kind of development actually is what brought a lot of new business to it, because of the increased lifestyle. It was so it was considered so beneficial, right? And it was designed intentional, and a lot of it was done. It was in the beginning done in a guerrilla kind of way in terms of redesigning intersections. And creating city parks and food forests and the like, but then later developers came and started designing around that, around the suburbs. And now we have this lot of land, and I think that's why I'm here, is to help define that, right? As a member of the community and as a voice for the person who was online saying they lived here, because there was all this green space and because there seems to be an appreciation and a prioritization for that. And so I think we define our priorities. Maybe a city planner then helps us to financially or architecturally or whatever in terms of the technical specifications. But again, even then, I want to make sure I'm hiring somebody who is not, that builds a million Wendy's or a million of these like really, McMansion type subdivisions or whatever. And they're gonna come in and do the same thing, but there are other options and people are doing it. And if anything, I think it's gonna make us, our community more in our financial future more sustainable and it'll be more stable because it has to be more flexible and it has to be more humane. It can't be just getting designed around the car like it is.
yeah.
So, if I may, I'm not against anything you're saying, but by example, and then because of the words that I'm using, I will help maybe hopefully that you understand the distinctions I'm making. I believe that what this group should be doing is putting together the program for the site. And I'm going to use the analogy of making a meal. You cook.
Yeah, I am going to stay out of this give and take, but I feel a little bit talked down to, but I'm gonna let you talk.
I'm not.
I understand that's not your intent. So just.
So when someone makes a meal, they might say, I don't cook as well as a chef, so they might want to use a chef. And so the programming would be, I like to eat this, I like that, I like the other thing. and maybe they don't all agree, but I'm just telling you about what things I like to eat. The chef starts to put that together. That is what I'm using as the word to define. Is to then take those things that the guests, whoever they're cooking for, like, and put that together in a composed meal. Because when you program, sometimes you're not consistent. You add more things, you have desires, the priorities are different, and so on. And that's the chef's job to balance that. And then one could argue it becomes a recipe, and then that would be what the developer begins to build. So that is the way I use those words.
Right, so to continue your analogy, maybe somebody comes in, maybe there's a great chef and they have a certain specialty, right? But then you have people who come in with allergies, gluten-free allergies, and they're vegetarian, and they're vegan, and they want their food grown in a sustainable way. There are chefs that can do all of the above, and then there are some that aren't. So maybe a certain community would want somebody with those specific values, right? So that is what I'm talking.
And I would say that's the city planning we hire.
And we would be making that recommendation in terms of, well, then I can't just be. We're also just designing the menu and this restaurant or this meal that we want to eat. It's not, oh, we're hiring them and they're spending on her and they're just making all the decisions. It's, oh, what do we want this meal to be? That's what we're just defining.
I also think that this is sort of an age-old question, right? Like this is the question that we've been trying to figure out as a city for a very long time, which is again why we're doing the RFQ, not the RFP, because we don't necessarily know whether we want somebody to develop it all at once or if it's going to be a phased development. Like that's probably like it is vague. Like this is vague, and I think that was like, as somebody who helped to develop it, that was the intent, was because we want to see what percolates from what we get from qualifications, and then possibly what then turns into a proposal that council can then vote on or not. Right, because we've tried both.
And there's been so many iterations of this where that was more viable before, right? Maybe a one master developer, where now that may not be the case. And so I think that's the point of having options. And I agree when you were speaking, Diana, about, we, the royal we in this room, the community, are laying the foundation for what we expect, what we want for our community. And then we send it to the professionals to say, okay, put this into the language for developers to understand how to do that, right? Or like, and how do they stay aligned with that as they approach us to try to develop the space, whether that's in smaller chunks in the parcels, or if we magically found somebody who could do it all. But this process is to walk alongside that, to hold them accountable to what we expect as a community.
Wait,
Sorry. Yeah, and I got asked a question, the last developer, was that, one developer?
The attempt?
Yeah, the attempt. that
Yeah,
cost
yeah,
us-
yes, it was.
That cost us to go into bankruptcy.
Oh, wait, so you mean the first one?
The first.
I think it was, right? Yes, it was.
That one, the second one, what was that?
One.
So.
So it was
then-
broken up, then it went back to one again.
Okay.
So it was one, then it was broken up, then it went back to one, and here we are today. Nothing happened.
Maybe we should try something new.
I
You know what I
agree.
mean? Because we had 2 attempts at it, right?
Three.
Three attempts at it, sorry, and it didn't work. Maybe trying at a smaller scale. There's some kind of bug in here.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, it's trying to get us over here now.
Oh. It's,
I'll work on the time picture, and it's 9 o'clock.
It's 8:50.
it may be a smaller scale would get us more success. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Support.
I think if we put in our thoughts, like forest,
Yes.
open space, green spaces, walkability, and we list those as like priorities. And then someone comes in and says, I'm gonna build you the nicest McDonald's with tons of parking and 0 trees.
No.
That just provides the city commission like the tool to say, well, wait a minute, this is not actually
Right.
what the committee said. So I'm hoping that we can kind of get to those sacred spaces, sacred things that are important to our community, and just pound those into here over and over, you know what I mean? So that it's repeated, and so that, I don't know what those values are, I'm not trying to impose on those, but if we repeat them
Yeah.
enough, and a person comes in with something that is a strip mall of, across all 38.
Yeah, I mean, our identity needs to be in it.
Yeah, our people and our elected officials to say that is not what we want. Is that kind of, I think that's what we're going for, right? So
Yep.
maybe it's not a map that says develop here first, but it says something like, if you're going to develop, think green space, think walkability, think this, right? That might-
Everything gotta start, like even Monopoly, right? You start. Somebody gotta start.
Right.
Somewhere.
Mhm.
You got brownfield experience? Who is it, developers out there that can have enough resources to be able to develop this big plot of, land all by themselves?
I can't forecast that. I've seen it both ways, right? Stay there, both on the authorities. Sometimes like you're in downtown Ann Arbor and you have you can make so much money on that redevelopment, they can do magical things there. I don't know where that stands. But I will say, like, a lot of the redevelopments I've seen move forward, there is almost always some green space that is negotiated into those developments, you know, that can preserve that, right? So I don't know if that's all. I worked on a brownfield that turned into nothing but park space, and I've worked on a brownfield that is nothing but apartment space. So it kind of goes across the way.
That ain't what I was asking. I said, is it one single developer can develop this
It
30?
can be, but I think that might be really challenging.
They told us
Yeah,
that.
that's.
Really challenging on this site, but I don't know that.
Facilitator Drive.
Okay, can we take a vote for 5 more minutes of discussion
Yes,
before we
sir.
wrap
I
up?
thought it was.
Because I feel like we can go all night. I have things that I wanna say. Choosing to vote on 5 more minutes of discussion. Yes? And
Excuse me, what?
5 to 10, which one is it?
10 o'clock or 10 minutes? I missed that. I'm sorry.
Just discussion of this and then figuring out the facilitator outside of that.
Are we calling this extra 4 minutes of going to, like, what's the, we can do like a time, till we get out of here, instead of 10 minutes?
Okay, all right. Here's the question. Would we like to wrap up right now by choosing the facilitator for next time, or would we like to continue with 5 more minutes of discussion?
I got a question first. What is our next week?
Next Wednesday is the visioning.
Next week, Wednesday is the visioning, which will get us closer to what we're going. I think it will.
No problem. Have as much time as you want.
I don't.
Oh, God. That's open-ended.
What is this, a 0? So we got visioning, we're gonna rehash this, we're gonna revisit this, right?
You know what we're voting for.
Yeah.
A 0.
5 more minutes. 0, I don't know, this is y'all plan, and it's 5 and 6
So
done.
but I don't know what the question is then, because you want to stop or.
No, I think she didn't want. I think she didn't want it to go on endlessly.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't-
Okay.
but you're not saying like off until we just like somehow this one, right? Okay.
No, he was in 5 minutes more discussion and then pick the facilitator and be done,
Be done.
right?
Okay.
Everybody cool with that?
You gotta vote.
All right. 5 more minutes of
Alright.
discussion. Sorry to derail it.
You wanna give a time, maybe just say like 9:15.
Yeah, you said give a time, that would be better.
Okay, so 9:15. We're going till 9:15.
That's 10 minutes, that ain't 5.
I'm sorry, I was giving
We
an
have to give a
example.
facilitator for
That was
that.
an example. That was an example. That was an example, sorry.
So is that including the facilitator too?
Yes.
Got you, okay, I'll go,
Be efficient, guys.
All right.
I'll go with it.
Can I be nominate myself, but by 9:12, we get into picking.
Let's just.
We're good.
Yes, everybody agrees. Visually in the
My
room.
statement is, like, a lot of things that we talked about, I think are in the community benefits section on page 9, and if you look there, that's like the one section that's not filled out at all. So I wanna like pull us back down to, we were looking at the introduction, we were looking at the environmental status. And I know all of that is interconnected. to like what we want to happen, but we're like focused on the introduction.
I would say, well, the conversation about the face, this is the bolded part, right?
Well, you stepped outside the line.
Also, just from staff, from a staff, also from a staff perspective, I will need to know also, like, from what was presented tonight, like, what of those maps and things, do we want to make sure all 4 of those maps are in this RFQ? I think probably, but like, that's the feedback I need from, like, that's why I brought them here to talk to you guys. That's why I had them develop the maps.
And those conversations happen throughout all these meetings that we're gonna have, right? Oh, I just wanna make sure we don't have to decide that.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you,
That's-
like, I just putting it out there that, like, that's what like, that's why I said 1 through 7, so that we can have that conversation too. So,
But that would include the updated one of, like, they.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yep, yep.
So you're saying like whether we would want them to update it to have it in the RFQ?
Right, well, yeah, because they will update that one because there's no buildings on the site, but like identifying where the buildings have been, because that's likely where they would find structures and foundations and things. Yep,
These are the latest updated maps they presented.
It's like, I can't think, I'm sorry.
except that last one, because that one wasn't updated, yeah,
Yes.
the building
Like,
was
the
one.
question for staff, like for something to bring back, just
Yes,
there, in here, it was talking about, like, it kind of set up the starting point being return property to tax rolls as a requirement. And so a question I have, I don't think we're gonna answer, but something is to think about, like, what is a sense of what additional, like, tax base would be a benefit? Obviously, it's like, oh, 100%, we know that that's not realistic, and it's, I don't think it's gonna match the usage.
sure,
But just like, you know,
Mhm.
if,
Yeah.
you know, 30% of the land is returned to tax rolls, that would give us
X amount.
a big boom, so we can have a sense of proportionality.
Mhm, mhm.
Thank you.
It's a great question.
Question I have is, based upon the TIF and other captures, when will the general fund see tax revenue? 30% or 50%, whatever percentage of the site is developed. When will those funds, the city cannot be captured?
Mhm. So for 10 years.
So,
It'll be a long
having
time,
said
but.
that,
Mhm.
then I would say, the more that the site is developed, the better for the city, because when all that comes off the capture, like, you know, that it goes to the city.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So yes, we all want the maps in there, right? We vote on that or not? vote on it?
Oh, we'll discuss that further on. I think Katie was just saying like.
In
these are
general,
things that
these are
we
the
think
outstanding
about
questions that we need to
need to have
discuss.
for the beginning of this RFQ.
I have a map specific comment.
Yeah, yeah.
That said that the map they showed today did such a better job of describing the site than the map that is
Oh, yeah.
currently in the
Uh-huh.
RFQ. That map is very, I didn't understand that, and someone pointed that out at our last meeting. I thought
Yep.
it was a really good
Yep,
point.
it
So
was.
the map that's currently in the RFQ, I find not
Yep.
useful, but the ones that they showed today, very, very useful.
Yes,
Yep.
And we're in the whole plan.
With that being said, too, I also feel like those maps that we have, the topographical one too, that showing the tree area too, like, I think those is needed too, because like when I'm walking down the street, I do see what's right there, so I can see this, but I
Sure.
don't see it.
Yep.
Because I'm from here, I know how to wiggle through there with my feet.
Yep.
So like that, you kind of kept to, for people who don't know about architectural land.
Sure, sure. Yep,
I feel like a map that shows the relationship between downtown, Ecotown. There's no,
more of a bird's eye.
there's no.
To see the connection, right?
I feel like, oh, this is actually a pretty cool spot.
Yeah.
Oh, and actually, so one thing that Jeremy didn't say, but we have a lot of drone footage that he's taken that does a really great job showing that. Like, it shows like coming over from Riverside Park over like across Michigan Ave and like from downtown. It's really beautiful. And shows it really well. And so we've talked about releasing some sort of a video also with RFQ, so a developer could look at that and see that connection. And I think that would probably
To link it to.
might be a good maybe a good way to show it.
Does it go further back, to the south and?
Yes.
southeast?
Yes.
Okay. You want to end this?
I'd like to propose that we are, we're required to the break, during our children responsible for giving feedback, so the break, but I've noted a number of things in page 27, so I would suggest that we there, then it's forefront. Next time, not necessarily next week for the television, but the next time is fire, so.
Yeah, absolutely. Send me your red lines for sure. Any edits, red lines, because I can just mark them all up and then we can just red line together. It'll be fun.
That's fine. Sure.
So
I don't like
we
that.
decided last time that the co-chair was going to step up to the chair for next time. We're still doing that.
You forgot that you.
So, but we need somebody to
Somebody to
co-chair with you.
co-chair.
Co-chair for the next meeting.
All right,
Yeah.
great.
I'm gonna naturally do that anyway, cause like, when I see somebody talking over somebody, I'm probably gonna like, hey, let them talk.
Thank you.
And then, are there other, like, aside from the open questions, the red lines, are those the sort of things that we're thinking for the next agenda? Like these open questions that we talked about, tax rolls, funding, and, seen by the city, the maps
Mhm.
and the red lines, those
That's
are
a
kind of the
lot.
conversation. It is a lot
It's
already.
a lot going through the RFQ and then the questions. I
Yeah.
think it would be a lot.
Can we keep it on the same email thread, so it's still kind of like the same consensus too, so everybody can see, cause I appreciate you a lot, Ms. Katie.
Well, thank you.
I'm
I'm trying.
Thread. That get, for us, that get a little cumbersome, the same email thread,
The
but.
next meeting, that's already.
So that's.
Right,
we're
yes.
Talking about
You'd be
after the
June.
visioning.
You'd be June.
So it's after the
Maybe
visioning.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Yep. Great.
So we have a facilitator for that
Adjourned
one.
9:12. Oh, wait. Did we want to have a public comment?
Oh, sorry. I don't know.
Next agenda, so the first part of the next agenda is gonna be the question. Well, then regarding the red line of the pages 1 through 7. Then are we going on pages 9 through?
Yeah, or if anybody, I mean, you guys can send me red lines for the entire document if you want to. I think that's probably better. Yeah, I think red lines for the document. Yes. Yeah, I think red lines for the whole document since we have a couple months in between. And then we'll talk about the funding and probably a conversation about TIF and what that looks like and
Explain TIF, tell me what TIF actually means.
At 120 seconds, can we do a?
TIF and tax rolls.
Can we do a quick vote on everybody just get on top of this and we keep going as forward further we can utilize the time with the red line?
A vote?
Yeah.
No, that's what we're gonna do. That is.
Are we done? Just so you all know, some of you don't know who I am, I'm Joe Myers, I'm the Director of Community Service, I work with Katie. When leaving, who here drove and parked in the parking structure?
Oh, great.
Okay.
I told them I could. I was like, I told them I could.
Once you will not be able to come back in, and so, and when you drive up to the gate, drive slowly and it will automatically raise.
Don't back.
Don't ram it.
Thank you, Mark Smith, is the owner of this building.
Audience.